Hey, what's going on, guys? So in today's video I'm gonna show you how to get started with an ASP.NET Core project, and we're gonna be exploring the MVC format. And as we may already know, MVC stands for the Model View Controller format. So let's fire up Visual Studio. Here you can see we're on the ASP.NET Core page. You can check this page out at .NET.Microsoft.com and search for ASP.NET Core. Right, and you can take a look at what it's all about. So let's just fire up Visual Studio. And we're going to create a new project. And we're going to select ASP.NET Core Web Application. We're going to click Next. And we're going to give our project a name. So we'll be creating an e-platform that will help us to register for courses, store student information, do enrollments, and that type of thing. We'll be choosing the MVC Model View Controller Web Application, and we're just going to leave all these settings the same. So let's click Create. Okay, so now we have our project created for us, and you can see over here on the left hand side we have a few folders, a few directories, and files that have already been created for us. So we have a file here for our controllers, and you can see we have our home controller. So in this controller you can see here that we have the action result index, and this is really just a method that's returning a view, and the name of the view that this is returning is the index view. So if we come down here to the views folder and open up this home folder, you can see here that this is the page that would be rendering. So the name of the controller corresponds to the view directory. So the name of the controller is home, and therefore it will automatically look for the index page inside the home view folder. If I had a controller that was called student, for instance, I would create another folder inside my views folder and call it student, and then if I had an index page inside that directory, it would automatically load that index page. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves right now. Let us simply run this project and see what we get right out of the box. And you can see this is our ASP.NET application right out the box. So we're on the home page, and we also have a privacy page. And if we go back to our application, and we'll see, let's just stop this. If we go back to our application, you will see that we have our privacy page right here inside the home page. And if we go back to our home controller, we can see that there's also an action called privacy, which is returning this privacy view page. Alright, so some other things that I'd like to point out. If we go here to the program.cs, right, so this is simply the static void main method, and here you can see that we're creating a host builder, and we're building and running our application. Okay, and here you can see the method for the create host builder. We are just simply building and using our startup file. So all the configurations inside of our startup file is what we are basically initializing before our project will build and run. So let us take a look in our startup file, and we'll see here that this iConfiguration method gets called by the runtime, and we can use this method to add services to the container. So like I said, over here in the program, the method create host builder, it's simply just basically calling all of these methods by the runtime. And by runtime, I simply mean once you run your project, that's the runtime, okay? And then we see here we have another configure method, and this method also gets called by the runtime, and this method is used to configure the HTTP request pipeline. Okay, so we can see here there are a few methods in here, whether or not the project is in development mode or not, and a couple others. We can use HTTPS redirection, use static files, meaning files such as our CSS files, JS files, and so forth. We can use routing, right? And down here you can see our routing pattern. First it's going to be the controller and the action in the controller, which is index. So first it's controller name, then action, and then whether or not an ID parameter has to be passed to that action. Here we have user authorization, so we'll take a look at authorization later on, and of course endpoints is what I just showed you here with the mapping for the default the default page that will load once your website is loaded, and how your actions will be called when a user actually clicks on a link or makes a request from your application. Alright, so that was just a brief rundown of the project. What we'll be building today is a simple school management system, and in this school management system we're gonna have a section here that can navigate to our courses, student information, and so forth. So let me actually show you what we'll be doing today, right? So this is what we'll be building, the Contoso University web app, and users can view and update student, course, and instructor information. Here are some of the screens that we'll be creating, and you can find this tutorial under Microsoft documentation, right? So we'll be going through and creating a fully functional CRUD application, right? So we've already gone through and created our application, our model MVC format, and now let us start with these different steps, okay? So some of the changes we want to make first are to the site and the menu layout. So it says open shared layout.cshtml and make the following changes. So simply we're going to adjust the title to look a little bit better. I don't know if you realize when it first loaded there was no space between the title. And also we'll be adding links to these navigation pages. We want to be able to navigate to home, students, courses, instructors, and departments. So this highlighted area, I'm simply going to copy, go back to my project, and of course we will be going to the shared layout. First we will be putting a space for the title, and then we'll be adding these additional navigation items. So now if we just simply open up this web page, you can see here that we now have those student links. They don't go anywhere currently, but they are there. Privacy link still works. Okay, so let us close this and go back. Alright, and this is just simply adding a space again in the footer of the document. So we can simply do that. Okay, so moving right along. Alright, so we can replace the contents of the views home index page with these contents, and it will look exactly like this. Okay, so if we copy this and we go to our index page and we simply paste that in. Alright, so we see we're getting a layout similar to what they're showing us here. Alright, so we have to add some NuGet packages. So the one package that we're gonna add is Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So in order to do that, we need to open up our package manager console. Alright, so first we actually have to type so if we go out to NuGet package manager, so I just simply want the command to install a package, right? So simply NuGet install and then the package ID. So NuGet install or it could be NuGet dash install. Okay. Okay, so it's simply install dash package. So install dash package. Alright, so there we go. So that should successfully install the Microsoft Entity Framework Core. And that's going to help us to quickly create our databases from our classes. Okay, so now we're getting into the data model portion of our project. So this is what our data model will look like. So we're just going to do simply for this video, we're going to do course, enrollment, and student. So we can see a one-to-many relationship between student and enrollment. Also a one-to-many relationship between courses and enrollment. So let's create a class in the models folder and name it student.cs. And let's just paste that in. And we'll do that 2 more times. One more time, we're going to create an enrollment, and feel free to navigate to this link. I'll be including the link with the video so that you can actually go through and read what is happening. Alright, so you'll see here that any property that is named ID or class name ID will be interpreted by the entity framework, which is the package that we just downloaded here in the package manager. It will be interpreted as the primary key. Alright, so you can see it has an ID, a string for last name, middle name, and first name, and also a date time for enrollment date. And here you can see an I collection of enrollments, meaning that one student can be enrolled to multiple courses. All right. And you can read up some more on I collection T and list T and so forth. Now we're going to create the enrollment class. So we go back to our project, add a class to our models, call it enrollment. And we paste that in. Right, so we can see here there's an enum, meaning that there are different options that can be selected for a grade. Okay, and here I want to point out, here we're seeing grade as with this question sign after it, which means it is a nullable property. So this field grade is actually this enum, and it can be null. So what null means is that if a grade isn't known or hasn't been assigned yet, it will just be null in the database. And remember that a null value is different from a zero value. Okay, so this question sign simply means that a property is nullable. It's allowed to exist as a record with no value. All right, so that's what that means. Now we're going to go to the course.cs. So let's create that. Okay, so we now have our course class. All right, so now we're going to move on to the database context, right? And this is the main class that coordinates entity framework functionality for any given model that is included in this class. All right, so in this class, in this data model, you can customize certain entity framework behavior. So in this case, we're going to name this school context. So let's copy this. So we're going to create a new folder called data and add this class to it. So let's right click on our project, add a new folder, name it data. Inside data, we will add class folder. I'm going to call it school context. And we're going to add, so you can see here we have the context for a database set for the courses, enrollments, and students. All right. So it says here we could have omitted the DB set enrollment and course statements and it would work the same because entity framework would include them implicitly since the student entity references the enrollment entity, right? And the enrollment entity references the course entity. So if we only had student in there, it would still implicitly realize that there are relationships and it needs to go and fetch those other database sets. Okay, so this section here is simply it's simply overriding default behavior by specifying that the table names in the database context would have would not be pluralized, right? So some people create database tables with pluralized database names. Some people prefer it to be singular. Right, so right here we're just going to be overriding that behavior once entity framework creates that model for us. So let us copy this little section here and we're going to include it right beneath our database set. All right, so now we're going to register the school context. So dependency injection, and this is a great topic all by itself. So ASP.NET Core supports dependency injection as a software design pattern, and what it is a technique for achieving inversion of control between classes and their dependencies. So what that means, if there's any object that is required by, or any feature that is required by the entire project, whether it be a service, whether it be access to a database set, whatever it may need, once the application is going to depend upon that service or resource, then you're going to include it in, or inject it rather, into your entire application, instead of always having to create a new instance, a new object. You just simply include it once in your project, and then the project will automatically have access to it at all times. Okay, so in our project, where we configure these dependencies would be in your startup file. Okay, so we'll be adding that to our configure services collection. So let us actually grab, so one thing I want to point out here, right, in this you see services.add MVC. So that was for .NET Core 2.0. We are now at .NET Core 3.1 at the time of this recording. So instead of .add MVC, it is now add controllers with views. And you can still actually choose add MVC. You can see that that method is still available for us, and it would work just the same, but since we're in 3.1 now, we'll be using the add controllers with views method. So let us copy this section here and let's drop it in here. Okay, so what we have added the name of the connection string, which is passed into the context, which is the school context, by just calling a method on the DB context options builder object. Right, so a lot of these things are abstracted in the framework, so it's just a matter of you reading and just trying to get an idea of how these things are all wired up together. So we need to add some using statements to be able to use these context, the school context, and all of this, because right now we're getting some errors. So we need to include .NET Core HTTP. To include the school context, we have to use the namespace Contoso University.data, because that's where we'll find our school context, which is right here. And we also need to include our entity framework core using statement. Alright, so that should take care of those errors. Now we need to add our actual connection string to our app settings.json file, and we can simply connect to our local database, which is built into Visual Studio. So let us do that. So let's open up app settings.json, and we can just add it on, put a comma, and then paste it in. So now we have a connection to our database, and we have also injected it using dependency injection into our services configure services method. So you see here, this is our method, and we're injecting all of these different services into our entire application. All right, so we all know what the local DB is. It's a lightweight version of SQL Server, and it is really used for application development and not production use. So it starts in Visual Studio. It creates a .mdf database in your C users directory. So that's where you can actually find the MDF database, and when you're ready to go to put your application into production, then you can convert this into this local database into an actual SQL Server database instance. So now what we want to do is initialize our database with test data, right? So we're just gonna do what they call seed our database with some information. So you can see this information. We're creating a new student object, and we're creating several students, and we are iterating over the students and adding each one of them to our student table. We're doing the same thing with our courses and the same thing with our enrollments, and we're saving them each time. So this will seed the database, like I said, and that's so that we have some dummy data to work with initially. So to do this, we need to create a new class in the data folder and call it db initializer.cs. So let's do that. Okay, and let us copy this. Okay, so let's copy this, I believe. Yeah, paste that in. Okay, so now we need to modify our main method. Okay, so by modifying our main method, what we're actually doing is telling our project. So remember I said in the beginning, let's open up our program CS file. This is going to build our project and then run it. And in order to build the project, it needs to add all the different services. It needs to add everything that you'd like to initialize in your project before it runs the project. All right, so in this case, what we want to do is actually tell our project that, listen, we need to get the school context, and we need to use the db initializer and initialize our context with that dummy data before we actually run our project. So simply, we're just breaking up this create host builder argument. We're going to create an object, or we're going to create a variable rather to hold that object, and then we're going to actually do our provision for seeding the database in between, and then once we have done that, we can then run. So to do this, we use the var keyword. So var, we just call our variable host, right? And let us remove this, and down here we can use our variable host dot run. Okay, so what var does, whatever variable you create from var, it will be able to store any type of object. So var doesn't need to know if it's an int or if it's a string or whether it's an object. It will just create a variable that will hold whatever you need it to hold for you. So in between building the project and running it, we need to use our db initialize, and you can see this is a simple try catch statement, and we need to use our dependency injection, and let's just add our using statements to get rid of these errors. All right, so we're creating a scope and a service provider from our scope, and what we're going to do in our try catch statement is simply get the required service of school context and initialize our context with our db initializer data, which is all this information here. And then if this does not work, it will catch that error and tell us that there was an error trying to seed the database. Okay, all right, so we've added our using statements. So now it's time to scaffold our controller and views. And before I do that, let me build this solution just to ensure that there are no errors lingering anywhere. Alright, so our build succeeded. So now what we can do is use a term that's called scaffolding. So we're going to use the scaffolding engine to add an MVC controller and views that will use entity framework to query and save the data. So this action will automatically create CRUD, which is create, read, update, and delete methods, and this will just basically automatically let us be able to have a fully functional application. Alright, so first thing we're going to do, we're going to add a scaffold. So we're going to right click controllers, add a new scaffolded item, and we're going to select our student entity. So we're going to do that one first, and then we're going to select our school context, and we're going to scaffold out that functionality. So let's do that. Right click on controllers, add a new scaffolded item. We want to do an MVC controller with views using entity framework. So we select that and click add. We want to select student, and we want to select this database context, and the controller name will automatically be students controller, and it will create a view directory for students, which will have its own index, update page, and all the pages associated with CRUD operation for a student. So let's click on add. Okay, great. So now what has happened is a student's controller has been created for us, and let's take a quick look at what's happening in the student's controller. All right, so it's inheriting from controller, okay, which is a base class for an MVC controller with view support. And here in the constructor for our student's controller class, you can see here that we're adding the school context, and this school context refers to this school context here, which inherits from database context, and it already includes all of our classes, courses, enrollments, students, and any other classes that you may have. So the first thing it's going to do is create an index action, and it's going to return a view which renders, and you can see here that it's an async. So when you use async, you have to also include the await for the task. And what this task is doing, it is calling our context, and it's basically adding all the students to a list and sending them to the view. Okay, so there's also a details page for each student, and this takes a parameter for the ID of the student. So if the ID is null, meaning there's no ID for that student, then it's going to return the not found page. However, if it does find the student with that ID, it's going to return the first student, and first or default just means that as soon as it finds that record, it's going to return that record. So whatever the ID of the student is, it's going to select that student, okay, and then return that student to the view. All right, so this create method is simply grabbing all the different fields that you would use to create a student record, okay, and then it's gonna add that student to the context, which means it's just gonna simply add it to the database, and once it does that, it's just gonna return the student view. To edit, again, it's taking a parameter of ID. If it finds that student to edit, it will return that student to the view, and then once you make your changes, you can save that student information down here. So this is still a part of the edit, so it's similar to the create function. Once you have done your edit, it will update the student context, save the changes, etc. Then you have your delete method, which also takes an ID. It's going to look for that record. If the ID is not found, then it will say not found. If it does find that ID, it's going to delete the first or default async. It's going to use the first or default async method to delete the first or only record that should have that ID, because IDs are in fact unique. And this is just simply a confirmation prompt that will ask you if you indeed want to delete that student that was found, and once you select that you do, it will remove the student and then redirect you to the index page. All right, so that's what's happening in the student controller. So we can check out our views, and we see here that a students folder was indeed created, and inside our students folder we have our index page, edit, details, delete, and create pages. So let's actually test out this new functionality. So let's run our project, Control F5. Right, and if we navigate to the students link, we can see here that we now have an index page with our student data. We already have some hyperlinks here that will allow us to view details of a student. Right, we can go back to the list, we can view any student, we can actually edit a student. So if we click on details and we want to edit, right, so you're going to say justice, change that to Winslow. All right, we can see that that record has been updated. If we want to delete a record, we want to delete the student, we get our prompt, are you sure you want to delete? All right, that's nice. If not, we want to go back to our list, and if you do in fact want to delete, you can confirm that delete action there. All right, so this is a fully functional application. And if we go to create a new student, so let's just select that. So let's see here. So today is the 13th. Okay. All right, so we have added our new student here at 7:13 p.m. Great, awesome. All right, so that is a fully functional controller and view for our student class, and you can continue reading, and it will just pretty much explain what has been going on. If we want to see what's happening in our database, we can go to our SQL server, Object Explorer, and we can expand it here, expand and see our databases, and we should be able to see here Contoso University. And if we look at our tables, we will see here that it has created a course table. Okay, so it has the same fields that we specified in our class, and it also has our students table. All right, and if you want to view the data that's inside the student table, you simply right click and click on view data, and you see here will show you all the students that are currently in your database. And you can see here, this is the new record that we just created. All right, so that's it for this video. I believe I've gone a little bit over, well, over half an hour, I think 40 minutes. So we will actually look at doing some more CRUD operations and creating the actions and views for those other classes. All right, so for the next class or the next video, we'll be looking at implementing the CRUD functionality for the other classes. All right, so see you guys in the next video.